Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Kudo and I'm the Communications Coordinator at TechSoup Canada. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on planning a nonprofit blog that you can manage. Just a few things before we get started. First, I'd like to quickly introduce you to TechSoup Canada. So our mission here at TechSoup Canada is to help nonprofits use technology effectively, and we accomplish this goal in two ways. The first is to make the technology products more affordable through our technology donations program. We partner with corporations such as Microsoft, Adobe, and Symantec, and we offer their products as either an outright donation or at a significant discount for charities, nonprofits, and libraries across Canada. So for example, if you want a copy of Microsoft Office Professional, you can expect to purchase it for about $500 online or in store. But if you're a TechSoup Canada member and you qualify for our Microsoft Donations program, you can get Office Pro for $61. So as you can imagine, the cost savings can become quite significant, especially if you're purchasing software for your entire staff team. So creating a TechSoup Canada account is free. If you'd like to get more information, please visit our website at techsoupcanada.ca/getting_started. So the second way we try to help nonprofits use technology effectively is by creating and curating nonprofit tech resources. We write blogs, we curate content on social media, and we host events and webinars like this one to help nonprofits learn more about the technologies that can help them in their day-to-day work. So if there's at any point a topic that you'd like to learn more about, please let us know. We're always delighted and open to getting feedback from our members about what topics are important to them. So for today's webinar, you can go to the GoToWebinar panel on your right-hand side to change your audio settings at any time. You can enter questions or chat with us. We're both here to help you go through this presentation smoothly. And as well, at the end of the webinar presentation, we will have a formal Q&A session where I'm going to ask questions to the speaker on your behalf. Just a reminder that you are going to be on mute during this presentation, so if you have any questions or concerns, again, please feel free to chat to us in the question box. Also note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will upload the video, notes, and slides on our website shortly. And we will we'll send an email as well out to you with those resources once they become available. And now, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Marlene Oliveira. Marlene is a copywriter, communications consultant, trainer, and blogger at moflow.ca. It's a consultancy that specializes in helping nonprofits to produce better content. She has over 17 years of experience working in the nonprofit sector and has worked as a national communications manager at a large Canadian health charity for 6 years. Outside of her consultancy, Marlene also supports the nonprofit marketing and communications professionals through the nonprofitmarkcommunity.com. It's a site that provides free resources and information on marketing and communications, and they also host a monthly #NPMC tweet chat where she facilitates conversations and connections within that community. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the controls over to Marlene.
Thank you, Matthew. And I am going to bring up my first slide. All right. And I hope that now, first little glitch, let's see. There we go. Are we okay with my slides, Matthew?
We are. You're looking good.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you for the introduction. That was awesome and better than I could have done, definitely. And thank you, everyone who is here, for joining me to talk about the tools and tips you need to make managing a blog for your nonprofit a little bit easier. So I did have a slide a little bit about me, but Matthew has done, like I said, a better introduction than I could have done myself. In addition to my consulting work, I run the Nonprofit Mark Community blog, and I do some training. And when I deliver training and I facilitate conversations among nonprofit communicators, I have been hearing in the last couple of years more and more from folks who want to start a blog or who want to do a better job of blogging, but are struggling with either resources or time being very tight. I'm sure that sounds familiar to you. I mean, in the sector, we talk a lot about wearing many hats. And in my training, and including my clients, I know a lot of people who are responsible for things like blogging. They could be in a communications role. They could be in a fund development role. I've had executive directors who really don't have a team to do it for them, so they're delivering communications and they are running their blog. So I ask you to think about how many hats you are wearing, even if within communications you have multiple roles, because once you take on a blog, you're going to be adding a hat. You're going to be adding the role of managing editor for a publication, because that's what a blog really is. And we talked a little bit about the Nonprofit Mark Community blog, and I've come to realize in the last couple of years since launching that blog that combining my experience with running that blog and my experience in the sector and working with nonprofit clients, what I've learned along the way from running this blog, a blog that has no staff, it has a minimal budget, and it really is a side project. I have some tips and tricks to share with you. You know, this is a side project for me, something I do on the side of my full-time consultancy. And if you know me, if you already know me before joining this webinar, you might know that I also run a blog specifically for copywriting and content creation help at moflow.ca. So I run two blogs. This one, a business blog, and I run a consultancy. Obviously, running the Nonprofit Mark Community has to be streamlined. And over the last almost 3 years, I have put things in place so that it runs smoothly, that it fills itself with content. The guest authors are coming to me, and that it's manageable as a side project. I'm not going to lie, it's still a lot of work. I still don't have any team helping me with it. It's still just me. So it is a lot of work, but it is definitely manageable compared to the early days. So as we go through this webinar, I would love to learn from you and give you a chance to sort of see what each other are up to. So we're going to have a number of polls. And the first poll is to get the answer to my question for you, which is, which of the following best describes your blogging experience? So I'm going to throw over to TechSoup to open up the poll. And I'm just curious, if you're more in the case, it's more the case that you are interested in starting a blog for your nonprofit right now, or that you have a blog but you need help keeping it manageable. You've already got a blog in place, but you're here on this webinar to learn about how to keep it manageable. Okay, interesting. And I'm just going to let those responses come in. All right, we've got a lot of people who do not yet have a blog but are interested in starting one up. So Joyce at TechSoup is managing. Awesome. Thanks, Joyce. You're throwing back over to me. I think you guys are, wow, 64%. Okay, do not have a blog yet. So very smart group who either have blogging underway or and know they need help or looking for help or want to get it all sorted out before they get started with their blog. So awesome. Okay, so having had that question answered, I want to tell you what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the challenges I hear from nonprofit communicators when it comes to blogging. I'm sure they're not going to surprise you. And then, as I mentioned, I'm going to share my tips and tricks, what it takes, what you need to put in place to keep those challenges under control, because they're real, so we've got to have a plan to address them. So first, let's walk through the challenges very quickly that I'm hearing about. First of all, I'm sure this one is familiar. It's very common. I'm getting asked the question, how do I justify the time that it takes to run a blog? How do I justify that with my manager or my executive director or with my board? People are struggling with coming up with content ideas that resonate with their audience. I actually get a lot of emails about this one. People are struggling with the review and the revision and the formatting process. So they're struggling with how to move from a draft blog post to copy that is ready for publication on a blog, on their blog. Of course, people are struggling with generating enough content to meet a regular publication frequency. Even if they have ideas, you still have to get that content created. Blog promotion, getting their blog seen, is the last of these challenges. So I'm going to move to another poll and ask Joyce to open that poll up for us. I'm interested, from those challenges that I've just presented, which challenge is the biggest one for you? What are you struggling most with? Is it justifying the time required for blogging? Coming up with compelling content ideas? The review, revision, or formatting process? Generating enough content? Or getting your blog seen? So of course we're going to have less people with that last option if we have a lot of folks here who don't have a blog yet. And as the numbers are coming in, I'm actually seeing a shift from the last time I presented this, which is it seems like less people are having a hard time justifying the time required for blogging, but coming up with ideas and generating content are still leading. All right, so there's a look at the results of the poll, and that's really, really interesting for me because just about 3 or 4 months ago, A lot of people want to figure out how to justify blogging with their leaders or their management. Okay, great. I'm going to go over to my slides. This is great teamwork. Thanks, Joyce, behind the scenes. Okay, so let's walk through these challenges one by one. You have a sense of what you're struggling with and also what other people around you are doing similar work to you are struggling with. So if one of your challenges is justifying the time required for blogging, there are a few things you need to have in place. The first is you need to have a clear purpose for your blog. You need a clear understanding of why you're blogging. It needs to be crystal clear and it needs to make sense for your organization. So I promise this is not going to be a webinar of poll after poll after poll, but one more for now, and then we're going to really dive in. So my next question for you, because this is so important, do you have a clearly defined purpose for your blog? Understanding there are a lot of people here on the webinar who do not have a blog yet, and there's an option for you to select there if you don't have a blog yet. But if you do have a blog, do you have a clearly defined purpose? Could you tell me in one sentence what your blog is trying to achieve? Okay, cool. I'm watching the answers come in. This was a pretty quick and easy poll, so if it's okay with you, Joyce, maybe we'll bring up the results. So this hasn't changed. The last question has changed quite a bit, but it's almost a 50-50 split here. So almost half of the organizations on this webinar who have a blog do not have a clearly defined purpose. And let's move out of the poll, and I'll talk a little bit about why having a clearly defined purpose matters. I apologize for having to keep going back into my full screen. It's a cool feature to have. Never without glitches on webinars, but this is pretty smooth. So you need to have a clearly defined purpose for your blog because, actually I'll step back for 1 second. Let's look at the benefits of blogging, because almost any nonprofit can benefit. In theory, you can benefit from having a blog. Why? Because a blog can attract high quality traffic for you. Your nonprofit's website will rank higher in search results for terms related to your cause when you're blogging about those subjects and including those terms. And a blog is a great platform. It's a platform that allows you to tell your nonprofit's story and to tell that story in ways that are rich with social proof, that include data on the impact of your mission. A blog creates opportunities to place calls to action in a context where readers are already engaged. They came to you to read your blog's content, and you can follow up and give them opportunities to take action. A blog is a platform for you to report back on your ongoing work or your ongoing progress. And it can also serve as a hub for all of your content marketing efforts beyond your written blog posts. A blog can be a place to embed and share and post other media like videos or images or audio or podcast episodes. So virtually any nonprofit can benefit from blogging for these reasons. To go back to that high quality traffic, according to the 2016 Nonprofit Communications Trends Report, that's put out by the Nonprofit Marketing Guide, and it's fairly recently released. It was released in January, this year's edition. So for, I believe, the 7th year running, nonprofit organizations are saying that their websites are their #1 most important communications channel. And according to HubSpot, organizations that blog have 55% more website visitors. So any organization can benefit is clear, but it is a lot of work and it can divide your attention. So you need to know why you are blogging. Beyond those general benefits, you need to have a blogging goal. It needs to be a clear goal that is tied into your organization's existing strategic priorities. You're not starting a blog for blogging's sake. You are supporting your organization's strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years, your organization-wide goals, and your overarching communications objectives. So a few examples to indicate what I mean. If your organization has decided that in the next 3 to 5 years you need to build more partnerships with other organizations in the space, in the subsector, or in the area of work that you're doing, a blog can support that goal. Or maybe you have an organizational priority to deepen relationships with your existing supporters. You know, just strengthen those relationships and nurture your relationships with existing donors, for example. Or maybe you have decided that your organization needs to be positioned as a thought leader. These are just a few examples, and we could go on, but have a look at your strategic plan and your strategic priorities, and think about how big picture organization objectives can roll out into specific time-based and measurable blogging goals that support the overall critical work that your organization is already doing. So a benefit of this clearly defined purpose is that it leads to your ability to measure success. And that helps you to evaluate and either justify blogging or adjust your plans because maybe it's not working out. But that way you can make a realistic assessment. And if it's working, that justifies the time spent on blogging. Something else that you need to have in place is a specific audience. It is always easier and more effective to plan and to write engaging content with a specific audience in mind. There's no shortcutting past this, and I really feel that you're wasting your time, or you're not using time efficiently, let's say, because of how much work is involved in blogging, unless you have a very specific audience in mind for your blog. Now, I know the reality is that as a nonprofit communicator, you are likely faced with a multiple audience challenge. But if you're just getting started with blogging, or you're struggling with blogging, prioritize and start with one audience for your blog. You can reach your other audiences through other channels that have proven effective for you. But give yourself the chance to keep it simple and to achieve early success with blogging before you expand to either multiple blogs or serving multiple audiences with one blog. I have a resource that I wanted to share with you because I think as part of identifying a specific audience, something you must do is create a marketing persona for that audience. It will help you with so many aspects of blogging that I'm going to touch on later on. So a marketing persona, if you're not familiar with what that means, is a really deep dive into painting a picture of your absolute ideal reader, treating it as one single person and looking into their wants and their needs and their habits and their preferences. And there are a number of different ways you can do this. Because I don't want nonprofits to ever skip this step, I rounded up resources that other people have created, other people in other organizations have created to help you with creating a marketing persona. So if you go to my website, moflow.ca/marketing-persona, you will find a list of options. Pick one that works for you. Resist the temptation to skip this step because it will help you to keep blogging manageable and strategic. All right, let's look at another problem that nonprofit communicators are facing when it comes to blogging. And we saw in the poll that this is a big problem for people on this webinar, coming up with compelling content ideas. If this is a problem for you, you need to define your blog's subject area scope and the specific content types that you'll feature. And to help you with this, I have come up with something I call the SPARK method. It's not rocket science, but it's about breaking this down into 3 steps. Those steps are: 1, define the subject areas for your blog; 2, select the content types, the mix of content types you're going to feature, and I'll get into those in a moment, and then move on to brainstorming and coming up with specific blog post topics. So let's break this down a little bit. First, you're going to come up with your core subject areas. This is simply thinking about the information you're going to cover on your blog in bigger buckets. Think about categories on your favorite blog, nonprofit blog or otherwise. Think about a blog that you visit frequently, and usually in the sidebar you'll see the blog categories. So my suggestion for you, if you're starting a blog or if you're kind of trying to breathe new life into your blog, is to choose somewhere in the ballpark 3 to 7 subject areas, overarching subject areas for your blog that make sense for your cause and your issue and your organization, and then select a mix of content types that will allow you to explore those subject areas. So here are a few examples of what I mean by content types. External cause-related news. So maybe you will be featuring news stories on your blog. Something was happening in the news. You're going to explain it on your blog with some commentary from your organization. External news that has nothing to do with your organization, but something to do with your cause. You might feature how-to content where you teach people how to do something in a step-by-step post. Another content type is a case study where you follow someone from their first contact with your organization through to a positive outcome or a positive today. And that could be following a program participant. That can be really powerful, or maybe a sponsor or a volunteer with your organization or more. Anyone you can think of that you could feature their story along a path. Maybe a content type that would work for your blog is a periodic leadership message, a focused and topical message focused on one topic, preferably from your executive director or your board chair, your president. And one way to handle this is to have them share updates on progress toward your strategic goals, your organization's goals. Another content type that I wanted to share with you today is an interview style post. So this is where you would speak with, say, a subject matter expert or a program participant or a volunteer and share the interview that you conducted with them in a simple Q&A format post. So these are just a few content types. If you really want to go in depth into how to come up with content ideas for your blog, I have other trainings dedicated to this. But for now, that's the Spark method in a nutshell. And what you would do is you would take those content types, treat them as a framework for the types of posts that you're going to feature, and then use them to brainstorm on specific blog post topics. Excuse me while I grab a drink of water. Thank you. So, for example, if you chose case studies, what you're then going to do is make a list of every participant or sponsor or volunteer, whichever one made sense for your organization. Make a list of everyone that you might feature in a case study. And each of those names is a specific blog post topic that you might pursue. Or if you chose how-to content, make a list of all of the questions people are asking that you can answer in a step-by-step post. If you don't know this off the top of your head, talk to the people who deliver programs or talk to people who answer your phones and find out what those questions are. And when you make a list of all of those questions, each one of those, every time you answer one of those in a how-to post, that's a separate blog post topic. So you can see how putting a little thought in at the beginning allows you to suddenly brainstorm 5, 10, 15, dozens of blog post topics with one content type. So you'll choose your mix of content types that make sense for your subject area and your blogging goals and brainstorm from there. All right, something else that you need in order to keep blogging manageable is a realistic publishing frequency. To determine how often you're going to publish on your blog, really think about your capacity. Be realistic. Think about the volume of content that you can produce, so that you can write or you can have others write for you. If you're experimenting with other formats that get published on your blog, what it takes to design or produce video, that kind of thing. Think about the systems and the people and the technology that is going to be required for each blog post that you want to publish. And think about what it's going to take to promote each individual blog post. That's a big one. You don't want to just think about the time it takes to produce the post, but you want people to see it. So you need to allocate time for that as well. When you're making your decisions, favor predictability and consistency. I'm going to repeat that later. But what you want to do is think about something that is predictable and consistent rather than aiming too high and choosing a frequency that's difficult to achieve. Whatever you decide, it should meet the needs of your readers, but while being realistic about what you can stick with over the long term. So you're finding that place between your blogging goals and your capacity and what your audience wants from you. And here's just one example of where your audience persona comes in handy. Because when you're developing your audience persona, you're going to learn some things about how often that audience even wants to hear from you in the first place. Be consistent and be predictable, because through these two things, you're going to show your commitment to your blog's readers, that you're not going to disappear, you're going to be reliable. And you're showing that you're also, publishing a respectable publication. And always focus on what you can do, what you can deliver, and still deliver quality and offer value. So don't overdo it so you find yourself having to churn out a post for the next day. My tip, my suggestion is to set yourself up for success by starting with a manageable frequency and then building later. I mean, stretch yourself a little bit, but don't stretch too far at the beginning. Start at a lower frequency than maybe is your ideal or your perfect frequency, and avoid burning out in the first few weeks and months, because you'll find some other ways to be efficient, and then you can build from there. Now, this is not so much a challenge, but a mistake that I see with bloggers, nonprofit bloggers, and bloggers in general, thinking you can wing it. Blogging success is all about pre-planning. If you don't pre-plan, then the need for content is going to sneak up on you, as I just referred to, and you're scrambling to pull together posts. So what you need to have in place is an editorial calendar. You need to create and schedule out an editorial calendar that lists the specific posts that you're going to publish and when. So an editorial calendar can have more than those two things, but at a minimum, you need to have specific blog post topics on specific dates on your calendar. And I believe it should extend for at least a few months because you want to always be able to have the bird's eye view of what's coming up. So you can be thinking about what it takes to pull those posts together. You can move that along. You can manage that project. I have a recommendation for what to do if you're setting up your first editorial calendar, and that is to decide on a trial phase. So make sure that trial phase is at least a few weeks. My suggestion is that it's at least a couple of months of trial. And during that trial phase, your editorial calendar, whatever you've decided for your frequency, and you decided carefully, it's going to be non-negotiable for that 2 months, let's say. It's going to be a top priority, non-negotiable. You're going to deliver every blog post you committed to, and that way at the end of the trial phase, you will have a good idea of what it takes to make that happen and how feasible that is. And then you can go from there, tweak and adjust your editorial calendar after your trial phase. When it comes to making your editorial calendar, we could do a whole session on just building editorial calendars, but use a format that works for you internally. So you don't need to have any flashy tools if you're not already using them. Use tools that you're comfortable with, and if you know you're going to need to share your editorial calendar internally, make sure it's something accessible to others inside your organization. That might be a Google Calendar, or it could be a shared spreadsheet. It could even be a Word document. I don't highly recommend it, but to be honest, I used that in the early days of the nonprofit mark community. It could be the calendar that you use internally in your organization, and you're just throwing the blog onto the calendar. But whatever you do, remember that blogging is a long-term approach. It's going to require consistency and commitment, and it will go a long way if you document that commitment in the form of an editorial calendar. All right, it seems like people on this webinar are less challenged by this problem, but I really often get emails about how to manage the review, revision, and formatting process. I think one of the reasons I hear about this is it can be a bit tricky or a little bit political, depending who your guest authors are, to edit them or ask them for revisions or ask them to change their formatting. I still come across this all of the time. You have someone who you really, really respect and they have amazing information to share, but it's not quite fitting with your blog's format. And so I can see why this is tricky for some. And the number one thing you need to have in place to help you with this are editorial guidelines. You need to have documented editorial guidelines. So we're going to go back to a poll here because I would love to know, for those who are on this webinar, do you have documented editorial guidelines in place? So this is a pretty simple poll. You either have them or you don't have a blog yet. So if you don't have a blog yet, please just choose that option. And for those who do have a blog in place, have you created and published editorial guidelines that you can share? All right. I think those answers came in fast and furious, and we can probably share them. Look at that. So most of the participants on this webinar who do have a blog do not have editorial guidelines. All right, let's move back to my slides. I have one thing to say about that. You need blog editorial guidelines. I feel so strongly that you need blog editorial guidelines. You've got the only uppercase slide of this whole presentation because they are so important. So let me tell you why I think that's true. Editorial guidelines do so much for you. They outline your blog's purpose and your plan. When you have them documented and you have them easily accessible, you can share them when you're approaching potential contributors because guidelines summarize everything that you're looking for in a blog post and why you want to publish that information. You can send them to potential authors who approach you to guest blog. Once you have your blog up and running and you're publishing on a consistent basis, you're going to start to get interested guest bloggers coming to you. And this can honestly be a huge waste, I don't want to say waste, but a huge use of your time talking back and forth with potential contributors. What blog editorial guidelines do is they give you something you can send over, let them review, and help them to self-screen, help them to ensure the right fit before you talk any further and start making specific plans to collaborate and to publish their work. Of course, the most obvious use for blog editorial guidelines is to have them serve as a reference and a guide for bloggers once they're on board, once the writing starts, and before the writing starts for sure, and then when draft copy is nearing completion. They can either be looking back to your guidelines, or you receive a draft and you can point them back to your guidelines if you're not quite in alignment yet. Well-written blog editorial guidelines communicate so many critical points that you would otherwise have to repeat on a weekly or maybe even daily basis. I most likely send out a link to our guidelines at Nonprofit Mark Community every single day. There may be an exception here or there, but it's nearly a daily occurrence. And there's a side benefit to blog editorial guidelines, which is having your blog being seen, taken seriously. I have a hard time saying that. The guidelines show your commitment to publishing quality and relevant and consistent content, that you're serious. And then when you ask for revisions, you've already shown why it's so important to you. Now, because I believe so strongly in blog editorial guidelines, I'm not going to leave you hanging. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about what to put in your guidelines. So here we go. When you're crafting your blog editorial guidelines, start with a sentence or two of introduction to the guidelines themselves. And that can include a little bit of a description of what your blog is. You want to include a statement of your blog's purpose. We've already talked on this webinar about how important it is to define a purpose for your blog, so include that purpose that you've articulated in a sentence or two in your blog's description within your guidelines. You want to describe your target audience. Again, just a sentence or two will do, but when you have people writing for you, they are more likely to land in the right place when they're writing with a specific audience in mind. That will help them to create content that is tailored to the needs and interests of your audience as you've defined it. Your editorial guidelines should also indicate your content criteria. So what I mean is, what type of content will you publish? When we were talking about content types like how-to posts or expert interviews, you would list that right here in your guidelines. We publish how-to content, interviews, messages from our leadership. You'd list those out. And that also gives potential authors an idea of what to write for you. They come to you knowing what will fit on your blog. When you're mentioning your content types, you can also, if you have a priority, for Nonprofit Mark Community, the priority is how-to content. So that's at the top, and that's mentioned in the guidelines. So people know if they pitch something else for us, we have book reviews or product reviews, if they pitch something else that's a lower priority, it may not get published as soon, or it's not what we're looking for with as much interest. You also want to mention your linking policy in your guidelines. What are the internal, meaning within the site, and external links that are either acceptable or encouraged in a blog post? You might ask potential authors to link to at least one or two other posts or pages on your website. Maybe you want to specify whether links to commercial products or commercial services are allowed or acceptable in a blog post. If you have guest bloggers who have their own blogs or websites, can they link back to their own websites within the body of their post? And if yes, how many of those links will you allow? Or do you want to limit those links to just their author bio? So think about all of that so you're not editing links out of posts later on. Of course, in your editorial guidelines, you're going to talk about style and formatting. So based on your audience and based on the content types you've selected, this is where you can get into details of things like your preferred headline style and format, or your word count, because this can really vary. Some bloggers will come to you and think that a 2,000-word blog post is just fine because it is on other blogs, but maybe you are wanting to keep everything from 300 to 500 words. You can specify things like sentence length, or use of bullets, use of subheadings, any spelling or grammar conventions that you want them to follow. If you have them, make sure that your organization's messaging or style guidelines are reflected here in your blog editorial guidelines, or that you're just linking over to them if you have them published somewhere else. You can talk about the general voice and tone that you prefer used on your blog. Now, you do want each writer's voice to shine through, so you don't want to be too restrictive. But when you give parameters like these, you will reduce the revisions and the work you have in revising, editing, and formatting later. Because style and formatting can be a pretty big subject, and a lot of people have questions about this, I wanted to share another resource I have over on my blog. So if you go to moflow.ca/blog-post-formatting, you'll see a blog post where I go into what I look for in a blog post. And you can use it as a checklist against which to evaluate your own blogs or the posts that come in for you. Now, to go back to blog, I'll just read that one more time in case to give you a chance to take it down, moflow.ca/blog-post-formatting. Now, what else should you have in your blog editorial guidelines? You should make your topic submission and your post submission and review process clear. So specify, do you need to see, first, just the topic, just the pitch for the topic? Do you need to see an outline? Do you need to see both of those things before you see an actual blog post? Or can people just send you completed blog posts for review? What's your preference in your workflow? Specify it here. How should guest bloggers submit their topic pitch or their articles? When and to whom? So if you can, include a specific email address here. Who should they send their blog posts to? Describe the whole process. Describe the submission, review, and approval process for blog posts here, along with the estimated time that it will all take. You know, if you're sending in a topic, you'll hear within a couple of days. Once you send in your blog post draft, expect to hear back from us within a week with revisions and, you know, that kind of thing. Send it at least 2 weeks before your publication date, that kind of thing. So whatever works for you and makes sense for your submission and review process, stipulate the top level details in your guidelines. You also want to talk about your republishing policy. You want to indicate if authors can reuse their content, the content they wrote for your blog, on other websites or blogs. And what are your terms for doing that? Now, the truth is, their content, if they've written it as their content, unless you've had them sign an agreement otherwise. But most people will be courteous about your republishing policy in exchange for the benefit of publishing on your blog. So if you want them to wait 2 weeks before they go and publish it on their own site or on Medium or maybe on LinkedIn, just tell them that, and most people will honor that. You might also want to specify whether you will accept republished content on your blog. Does it have to be original and written for your nonprofit's blog, or will you republish content that was published elsewhere previously? And then you want to indicate in your guidelines any other items that you need to have submitted to you. What else do you need? If someone writes for you, do you need their headshot? Do you need a bio? Do you need links to their social networks? Anything else? Do you need other images or other media to accompany the post? And if you do, what are the specs for that media? And once you have that all outlined, you need to publish your blog editorial guidelines, in an accessible location. Your guidelines can take a number of different formats, and they can be as simple as a bulleted list that covers these points I've gone over, or it can be more elaborate and a little more wordy, more explanation. But once you have them drafted, post them somewhere where you can easily direct people. I suggest having them published on a public URL. As long as they don't contain anything that's confidential or for internal eyes only, it'll be very useful for you to have a public link that you can send quickly and people don't need to jump through hoops to see your guidelines. Okay, so that's blog editorial guidelines. I really think they're important. That's why I really broke those down. But what else do I think you need to keep blogging manageable? I think you need documented processes. As you get into the swing of the different tasks that you're going to need to do as blog managing editor, so some examples might be formatting posts, or creating custom images for your blog, or searching for stock images for your blog, planning your social media shares. Start to document all of these tasks. Having them documented will make it easier for you as your blog grows. It'll make it easier for you to ask for help, because you can pass off the task with instructions. Or depending on, if something that only comes up once in a while, if you only occasionally need to create a custom image for a blog post, it might help you to streamline things later on if you haven't done it in a month, to be able to go back and look at your documentation. Okay, another problem that people talk about, and this is probably very familiar, is keeping up with content production. It is a lot of work. So obviously the first thing that you need to be willing and able to do is just roll up your sleeves and be ready to write and produce content. But even with the best laid plans in place, something's going to fall through, especially if you're working with multiple authors, and I think virtually any nonprofit blog can benefit from working with with guest bloggers. So you need to be prepared for things to fall through. You need to have contingency plans in place. When I say contingency plans, there are many different things you could potentially do, but here are 3 examples that I find very, very useful. The first is Evergreen blog posts. Have a lineup of evergreen blog posts ready to be deployed if a submission comes in too late to be published. If someone misses your deadline and you're not going to be able to work with them to get something ready in time and get it in the right shape for publication, set aside time for yourself as blog managing editor to write or to solicit content that you know is timeless. It's not time sensitive. It's content that can be published whenever you need it, and that whenever you publish it is going to offer value to your readers. That's what I mean by an evergreen blog post. Have a list of evergreen blog posts, have a roster of evergreen blog posts ready for you to use if something falls through. Another example of a contingency plan is crowdsourced content. Have a few ideas and relationships in place that will help you to quickly crowdsource content in a pinch. Okay, here's an example of what I mean by crowdsourced content. Every once in a while for the Nonprofit Mark Community blog, I feature something called a Roundup Post. If you see a Roundup Post on that blog, you might be able to guess, you might be right if you think that somebody bailed and a post fell through. And what I've done is I've gone and turned to a group of people who I know have great ideas or great insights that they're willing to contribute, and I ask them a specific question, ask them to answer it in a specific word count, and then my work is to just compile their answers and write an introduction and write a conclusion. And very quickly, I have a crowdsourced blog post. Now, this has turned out to be a very popular type of blog post. So it's a win-win situation. But think about your community and who you could turn to every once in a while when you need to crowdsource content. It could be a Facebook community or a LinkedIn group, where if you ask a question, you'll get really insightful answers that you can pull together for an interesting or thought-provoking blog post. Finally, the last thing I want to suggest you have built into your editorial calendar is flexibility. Make sure that you have enough of a mix of blog posts that some of them can be bumped or delayed if a pressing announcement needs to be published on your blog, or your executive director or chair of the board comes to you wanting to publish a leadership message that you weren't expecting. So as I said, one way to work with this is to make sure the mix of content types you feature on your blog isn't all time sensitive. That you have, say, if you have a lot of how-to content, a lot of that could be bumped and it wouldn't make a difference to your readers and to how it's received. All right, something else you need to have in place to keep blogging manageable is a clear late submission policy. You need to be clear about your terms and your plan, what will happen when a submission comes in after the agreed upon due date. It might sound like something you would never do if you're just starting a blog and you're going to be feeling so grateful for content to come in. But over time, it becomes unmanageable if you aren't clear and strict with your timelines and your deadlines, because late submissions mean you are scrambling and you have enough other work to do. To use the Nonprofit Mark community as an example, at this point, and it wasn't the case in the beginning, but at this point, if a post comes in after the agreed upon due date, it just gets bumped to the end of the rotation. And because of my other contingency plans, I will be able to fill in the gap. And being bumped to the end of the rotation usually means being bumped 3 months or so, maybe 2, but sometimes 4 months out. So it's not to be overly harsh, but it's just a way to keep things manageable and move on and let that person, when your deadline comes, you move into your contingency plan if you didn't get that post after doing reminders, if you're willing to do reminders, and you just move along. And you want to put those your submission policy, your late terms, into your editorial guidelines, as I mentioned. Something else you want to have is a mix of your contributors. You want to mix in terms of people who will contribute at different frequencies and the different types of content that they will provide. So keep in mind that if you're running a multi-author blog, some contributors are going to be able to contribute more often, or some contributors are going to be more reliable than others. They just are. And that's okay. You need to be understanding, and you need to work with that knowledge, because some of your less frequent or even your less reliable bloggers might be some of your best writers. They might provide the best content and the most value. So make sure that what you're doing as you proceed is that you're cultivating a pool of both kinds of contributors. You want to include everyone in your mix, but you do need a certain baseline of people who don't need to be chased, who are going to be reliable and still deliver quality. In other words, don't fill up your editorial calendar with people who are going to be more work or going to need more chasing or more prompting to write again for you. Now, when you are working under the assumption that your authors are working within your established guidelines, be flexible, as I mentioned before, about letting their individual voices come through. So there's that mix of different types of content, different contributors who can contribute different types of content. This will make things much easier for you, and it really is appropriate for a blog format and reduces your work in terms of revisions and formatting later. So mix of voices, mix of frequency, mix of reliabilities. Something else you need is a system to solicit content. It doesn't need to be anything formal, but it might even just be your mindset. You need to always be on the lookout for potential contributors so that you can always offer blogging opportunities when you see a fit. Keep making the offer. Keep extending the invitation over time, because some of these invitations are going to work out and some won't. But over time, you will be growing your stable of authors. And as I mentioned, that will add to the mix of authors that you have, and it's going to make blog management and content development much easier in the long term. You don't want to be going back to someone who did an awesome job once and begging them to write again. You want the door to be open to them and inviting them every once in a while, but you want to nurture a bigger and bigger and bigger pool of authors so that they're coming to you as well. So think about where you might find bloggers. Maybe it's volunteers. It could be board members. It could be your peers in non-marketing or non-fund development roles. Maybe it's subject matter experts. Perhaps someone is blogging in a shared topic area to your nonprofit, and you want to invite an established blogger to guest blog on your site. When you attend events or you're checking out events, look at the speakers and ask if they'd be willing to share their expertise in the written form for your blog. And one that I really love is think about your blog when you're networking. Most of us are out networking at some point for your own professional purposes. So when you're out there and you're building relationships, if you see a fit, invite people to contribute to your blog. People love to be invited. It's nice to have something to offer and to kickstart relationships with. All right, we're nearing the end here. So let's look at the last challenge that we talked about, and that is getting your content seen. So you're going to need to develop a promotional plan for getting your blog in front of your audience. This is going to depend a great deal on that marketing persona that you created. That's going to tell you where to find them. And from there, you'll use a mix of search engine optimization, email updates or email outreach, and social media updates to help let people know that you have published blog content on your blog. But I would like to suggest, it's related to the last thing we were just talking about, that you include partnerships and relationships in your blog promotion strategy. I think that if you embrace a spirit of generosity from the very earliest days of your blog, you're going to grow your audience and reach new audiences much more quickly than just tweeting out your blog posts aggressively. I get the question every once in a while, should we, and it's funny, should we feature our so-called competitors, in other words, other nonprofits, on our blog, or should we link? I've had that question, should we link to their websites, to relevant content on their website? My answer is yes. When it comes to blogging, it's a much quicker way to expand your reach to collaborate. Jealously protecting your blog as sort of your property will keep it just your property. Sharing it will help it get shared. So look for opportunities to share with people outside of your organization. You know, I mentioned guest blogging, but feature other members of your community in your content, maybe in case studies or in profiles. Give them the opportunity to write for you. I really think successful blogging and rewarding blogging and getting your blog seen, that a big part of all of those is about relationship building. All right, so let's quickly recap what we've gone over today. To recap what you need to have in place to keep blogging manageable. You need to have a clear, defined purpose, something you can state in a sentence or two. You need a specific audience in mind with a marketing persona completed for that audience. You need a defined scope and content type, a mix of content types, I should say. You need to establish a realistic publishing frequency for your blog that is specified in your editorial calendar, and that's reflected in your editorial calendar. You need that editorial calendar scheduled out for a couple of months, preferably several months. You need to have editorial guidelines in place and easily accessible, published where your contributors can reach them. You need to document your processes along the way. and you need contingency plans. The last few things you need clear terms for late submissions. You need to work with a mix of contributors. You need to have a system in place for soliciting content on an ongoing basis. And you need to go about blogging in the spirit of partnership and relationship building. Putting these elements in place at the beginning is going to take time, but it's worth it because blogging is a serious commitment and it is a very serious time investment. So it's important to be smart and deliberate about how you're going to proceed. Being prepared and having the right systems in place go a long way toward keeping your blog moving along, and it will start to move more and more easily. My own experience with the nonprofit market community blog is that having these elements in place, it still meant that there were going to be some hard uphill work. And it wasn't a short time. It was a lot of work for the first year, getting toward a year and a half. But at that point, we really kind of crested, and the momentum was behind us. And it is still work. There are still day-to-day tasks, but this blog is very manageable now. And I am hearing from my participants in my training that a few little things, adding a few of these elements in place, like editorial guidelines, is making blogging much easier for them. So everything that I have described today in this webinar really come back to having a carefully considered and documented blogging plan in place for your blog. So I have a question for you and a poll to ask Joyce to open up. Do you have a documented blogging plan for your nonprofit organization? So simple 3-question poll. Either you have a blog but no documented plan, you have a blog and it is supported by a documented blogging plan, or you don't currently have a blog. So you're off the hook for now, but when you get a blog going, you're going to have a plan in place. So we knew that we had a lot of people who don't have a blog yet, and wow, huge percentage of our participants today have a blog with no plan in place. So you know my recommendation. I'll go back to my slides now. My recommendation is that if you don't have a blogging plan, you need to take action. That is your action for today, leaving this webinar, is to have a blogging plan in place. It doesn't have to be a huge opus. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of, it doesn't have to be a long document, but it does take time to think it through. So if you don't know, if you haven't gathered from what I've gone over today, what you would put into your blogging plan, I do have a checklist. Now this is a checklist I put together for my subscribers to my MoFlow email updates. So if you go over to moflow.ca/blog-planning-checklist, I have a blog planning checklist for you. It outlines the elements I think are essential in your blogging plan, as well as a little bit of explanation in terms of what goes into that plan. And I'm just going to pause while you're perhaps taking that down. I see a comment from an audience member to make sure to look for certain skills like writing skills when soliciting guest authors. Definitely, that will definitely help you to keep blogging manageable. Although I will say, sometimes you're going to have somebody whose voice you want to feature on your blog, and they're not a good writer, or frankly, they're a terrible writer. And that's where you can do something, where you can feature them in something like a Roundup Post or a Q&A style post, where you have the opportunity to get information from them and edit it, obviously with their permission, and turn it into high quality writing. So you don't have to miss out on their insights just because they don't have good writing skills. But I totally agree that as a default, your bloggers should have strong writing skills, and you should be looking for samples of their writing skills. Okay, so you can download the checklist. I did also want to mention that if you would like more support and more guidance in creating a blogging plan, I have a training called Start a Better Nonprofit Blog. So I recently launched this course. It was in the fall, and it's a video-based course walking you step-by-step through the blog planning process. So I really break down each step. I break down the step of figuring out your blogging purpose and goals, of defining your audience, all of that. We walk through it very slowly together. So if you're interested, you can go to moflow.ca/SBNB to have a look at the course. If you have a blogging plan, so if you don't have a blogging plan in place, your action today is to start one. Excuse me, if you do have a blogging plan in place, have a look at the other elements we've gone over in this webinar and fill in any gaps. What's missing and how could you enhance or strengthen your processes to make blogging more manageable for you? And that's it for me. Thank you so much for sharing an hour of your time with me. We've got a few minutes for questions. I'm sorry I went a few minutes late, but we can take questions now. And if you have any questions, if you want to follow up with me over email, my email address is on the screen.
Thank you so much, Marlene.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to take time now to ask a few questions from our audience with the limited time we have left. So if you have not yet answered a question from our Marlene, you can do so in the questions chat box in the GoToWebinar panel. So the first question is, you talked about starting with a realistic consistency.
Yes.
I mean, what is the ballpark for that? What is an average blog post per week, for example?
Oh, average. Well, you know what I will say, I don't know about average because, quite honestly, if you look at nonprofit blogs that exist, so many of them actually do putter out. The average might be something like once a quarter, and that's not great. But I would say it's not a blog if you're publishing less than once a month. People will look at that and think it's abandoned because they expect posts to come up more often than that. I think a nice target is every couple of weeks. Maybe once a week if you feel you have the contributors and you have the capacity. So you're going to have to find that sweet spot. And maybe it's something irregular, like every 4 days or every 5 days, and your audience is reading on the weekend, so that can work for you. But let's say don't go any less than once a month. And some people will go as frequently as daily, depending on the organization and what they've got available.
Mm-hmm. And this is the second question. This has come up many times with our blog here at TechSoup. But what do you think about paying prominent bloggers to write on your blog in order to attract more traffic to your site, and maybe having an agreement with that blogger that they'll publicize that they've blogged your site in the first place?
Oh, interesting. Actually, Matthew, I don't have experience with paying bloggers, and I'm not a nonprofit, so I would say, first of all, I want to point to my lack of experience with paying bloggers, but I do, and I recommend that nonprofits do part of what you've mentioned there, which is look for contributions from people who do have reach and do have a willingness to share with their network so your blog gets seen. From a practical point of view, acknowledging that I have not paid bloggers before, I would say hold off on that. I would recommend getting your blogging chops, getting started, getting your blog going, seeing what you can do without paying bloggers, because nonprofits inherently have community. They have a community of supporters, and this is one opportunity. It can be a volunteer position, or it can just be an occasional opportunity for your supporters to be more engaged and contribute in a different way. Does that make sense, or would you have an insight to share from your own experience?
Yeah, that does make sense. Personally, with TechSoup's blog, we do not accept promotional posts. So when we have guest authors that offer to pay us to write for a blog, we turn them down. We do invite them after the fact to write in a volunteer capacity. So we still encourage them to share, but we just don't take that payment. And if they do include promotional links or ask to include promotional links, we edit it to call it out. So we say very clearly that this is a link to the client's website or their organization, just so nobody is tricked, in that sense. Right.
Yes. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So the next question. So from this viewer, they said their non-for-profit is very small, and finding graphic designers, affordable graphic designers, is very difficult. So what would be the best platform to begin our blog so to have that user-friendly customization?
So having the graphic design doesn't have to do with images for blog posts. It has to do with setting up a blog. Is that your understanding, Matthew?
Yes.
Okay, so basically a web designer or someone who can set up a site. So you can start with something very simple. My web design friends might not be happy to hear me say this, but obviously you can get set up with a WordPress blog and associate it with your URL very easily, and it can be a stripped down design. But the very fact that you're publishing and you're making sure to include those internal links and you're aligning it with your blog content, the starting a blog part should not be a huge barrier and does not need to be a huge time investment. And even if you don't trust yourself to get it set up, you can go to, I don't normally recommend these places, but you can go to Elance or Odesk. I think they've changed their name, or some of those less expensive places to hire freelancers to just set up a basic blog for you, and then over time maybe you can work on the design and enhance it, customize it more.
Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you again, Marlene. That's all the time we have, as it's almost 1 o'clock. I just want to quickly thank you again for helping us learn about managing our blog for nonprofits. And I'd like to thank
Awesome.
everyone who joined us today for taking the time out of your lunch hour. And this is a reminder that the webinar recordings, the presentation slides, and a recap blog post will be published on our website next week, and we will email you all once the resources have become available online. Please also fill out the brief post-webinar survey that will launch just after this session. And if you have any additional questions that we weren't able to answer today, we will follow up with you. Marlene can be able to follow up with you and answer those for you. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming out and listening to this webinar, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.